You can be seated. I'm Brooklyn. I'm a pastor here, and Coy is my husband. You'll hear from him in a minute. But we exist as a church, as some of you know and some of you don't know yet. We exist to uncover the value that exists in every single human being, and that is you. We exist to find those things that God put in you and desired for those things to bloom and to grow and to impact the world around you. And we hope that your time here will just expose those things. And sometimes that's not very comfortable. So I invite you this morning to, like Mary, when she realized that she was going to be with child, and the angel said a very important phrase to her, do not be afraid. Those 4 words, do not be afraid, are so important to anyone receiving Jesus, to anyone who receives him. Those are your words. Do not be afraid about what God might want to do in your life to take you from here to there. And so this morning, that's our invitation to you, to say, okay, I don't have to be afraid, God. I'm going to listen. I'm going to hear from you. Some of the things that are happening in our church we're really, really, really excited about. Some firsts and some repeated things. When we started as a church, we didn't have really a place to stay or go. So Christmas we had in an open field, in a barn, on a farm, with twinkling lights, and it was so magical. And I wish we could have done it every year, but we grew. And we moved Christmas Under the Stars to this, our new location, last Christmas. And it was a full house in craziness and wonderful. So we're going to do it again, but we're limiting the seating this year for the dinner to 500, just so that it's comfortable for everyone. And we'll have 2 seatings. We'll have dinner and worship. The kids' activities also happening, and the worship will be inside this year, but the 2 seatings are exactly the same. So we hope that you'll get your tickets with your families and friends at the same seatings, and you can do that right now at the tent before you leave or online. We also have something brand new that we're doing, and I'm so excited. We've kind of graduated to the next step as a church plant, but we're having Christmas Eve at Somos Church. Are you guys excited about that? I am so excited about that. And last night, this room decided kind of by a little vote we did that we're more of a PJ church than a dress-up church. So please just come with your cozy self, and if you want to dress up, that's okay too, but we just want you to come and enjoy being together with your family on Christmas Eve. And last, but certainly not least, this coming week, guys, we have arrived. When I moved to Lakeland, I did not know exactly what this thing was and why it was so important to everybody. But we as Somos Church get to be a part of the Lakeland Christmas Parade. Come on, guys. We have arrived. And people set up their chairs, 2 weeks in advance, and you know it's important. And I just cannot wait for you to see our float. It is so representative of us and who we are in Polk County and everything. And it's just amazing. And I'll just tell you a little bit of the theme. So, I think the only character that we watch at Christmas time that really is the greatest example of heart transformation is the Grinch. And so the Grinch is going to be riding on a sled, but we don't have real sleds that are that big. So we're going to have the most luxurious pontoon boat you have ever seen, scattered with twinkling lights, and it is going to be gorgeous and fun and so Somos. So please cheer loudly when you see that float. Invite everybody you know to, say hi to us while we're riding by in style. I'm so excited, and thank you, Doug, for, I can't wait. I guess it's the most amazing pontoon boat that has ever been seen, ever. So probably the 2020 edition, I'm guessing? Yeah? Okay, I'm so excited. Well, anyway, we hope you'll come out with us. Coy's going to come now, but let's just open our hearts to receive everything that God has for us today.
On the mountain, in the valley, in the crowded streets, or the empty desert, in our hope and in our waiting, we are never alone. God is with us.
Well, we're entering into our Christmas series, and that is the title of our Christmas series is God is with us. So take a moment, look to the person on your right, your left, and just tell them that God is with us. God is with us. Let's go and look it up and make sure that we can confirm that God is with us. If you have your Bibles, you can turn to the book of Matthew, The book of Matthew is the first book in the New Testament. We have the Old Testament, we have the New Testament, and there's very little difference between the two other than this, that Jesus arrives in the New Testament. Everything is about the story of God all the way through. There's not two different books of the Bible, one called the Old, one called the New. It's all one story that flows together, but we separate the two because the New Testament is when Jesus shows up. And the book of Matthew is what we call one of the four Gospels, and the four Gospels are the four books of the Bible that tell the story of Jesus. Now, not all the Gospels tell the story of Jesus' birth. Only a couple of those do that specifically the book of Luke and the book of Matthew, but mostly we go to the book of Matthew to learn about the birth of Jesus. So if you go to the book of Matthew, chapter 1, and you drop down to verse 23, you'll read a verse with me that will be the verse that we focus on throughout the entire series. And it says this, it says, "Look, the virgin, Mary, shall conceive and bear a son, and they shall name him Emmanuel." And those of you who have grown up in Sunday school know the answer, which means what? God is with us. You know, as people who are followers of Jesus, it's easy to believe that God is with us when things are good, when we're standing on the mountaintop, like whenever we receive good news, such as when you get that raise, or you make the team, or you get the grades, or you say I do, or you close on that house, or you get the perfect curbside at the Lakeland parade. You're like, God is good. And those of you who are new to the Lakeland area, I promise you, you won't get a good curbside at the Lakeland parade if you don't start days in advance. You know, for those of us who are followers of Jesus, it's easy to experience the presence of God when things are good, when we're on that mountaintop. But it's oftentimes much more difficult to experience the presence of God when you're in the valley. When you're in that place where things aren't going the way you want. Like when you receive news that isn't good. Or when you're hurting. Or when you feel alone. Or when you're worried and afraid. Or when you're depressed. Or when you're fighting with your family and with your friends. Whenever we are in the valley, oftentimes what we find ourselves asking is this question: where in the world are you, God? Where are you? I'm not sure if you're real. I'm not convinced anymore that you're out there because it seems like you've left me here all by myself. Which is why I want to focus on this weekend thinking about where is God in those valleys. Because what happens so often is you can have areas of your life, you can have many areas of your life where things are going really, really well, like the way you want it to go. You're standing on this mountaintop, but then you have this one area where you're living in the valley. And despite all this good that's happening in your life, it all feels like bad because that's what's consumed you the most. There was a time in Brooklyn in my life in 2007 where I would say we were riding pretty high, like a pinnacle moment in our life. We both went to college to be in the ministry, and we graduated college in 2001, and we didn't know what we were going to do. I knew I was going to seminary. I wanted to go to graduate school, and so we found one in Florida to get out of that cold weather in the Midwest. Man, we had to get out of the cold weather, and so we found one in Orlando, Florida. So we started looking for jobs in Orlando, Florida, and we were a part of the Church of the Nazarene, and so Brooklyn started to reach out to the network of the Church of the Nazarene, and there was this one tiny little church literally like 2 miles from the seminary, and they happened to be looking for a youth pastor. They'd never hired a female youth pastor before, never hired a female staff member before, and they decided to hire Brooklyn. So we spent 2 years at a church, small church in Orlando. After those 2 years, time came for us to leave. They finally kicked us out, and so we went to another church that was a little bit bigger, maybe about twice the size, about 300 people on the east coast of Florida in Rockledge. It was like dream location for me. Surfing was 10 minutes away from our house. I could wake up in the morning and go surfing before class, or I could wake up in the morning and go surfing before work. I could wake up and go surf before church. Trust me, if I lived where we used to live and I was the pastor of Somos there, I would have surfed this morning before I came to church. It was like a dream location. And then I started looking at PhD programs, and I had some network, and I had some connections, and there was one location, one school in Texas called Southern Methodist University where I thought I had a good shot. And so Brooklyn started looking at jobs in Dallas, Texas. That's a long way from Florida. a lot longer drive to the beach than 10 minutes. But she started looking, and she found a church, a United Methodist church, that was about 4,000 people on the weekend, and they were looking for a high school director. And so she sent them her resume, and they called us to come out and do an interview. And if you know Brooklyn, you know that they loved Brooklyn, and they would want to hire her. And so we came back, and they offered her the job. And I said, Brooklyn, if you really want to do this, I don't really want to because we're so close to where I want to be in the water. But if you want to do this, then let's just go ahead and say yes. And so we said yes. And it's like the beach started calling me. Like, don't leave me. I love you. And so I came back to Brooklyn, and I said, I don't think I can move away all the way out in Texas in the middle of the state that thinks they're a country. And so I said, can you call them back and let them know that I don't think that we can do it? And so she called them, and she canceled and said, we're not going to accept the job now. And then she came back to me, and she had this sad look on her face that women have the ability to do sometimes. Some men can do it, but especially women. She just looked so sad, and I felt so bad for her. And so I told her, Brooke, I can tell you really want to do this. So you can call them again and tell them if they will offer you the job that we will accept. And so she called them and had to tell them that my husband is crazy, and he decided that we couldn't do it, and now he's decided that we can do it. And so she called them back, and they offered her the job for the second time, and she accepted for the second time. And so we packed up our little moving truck, and we moved all the way to Dallas, Texas. Cowboy fan country out there. We got to go to some Cowboy football games on Thanksgiving. It was like the best Thanksgiving ever. Everybody just brings their fry daddies and everything else and just put those turkeys down in that thing, and you can share everybody else's Thanksgiving in Texas. And trust me, in Texas, everything is bigger. Thanksgiving is enormous compared to Thanksgiving anywhere else, and it was so much fun. And we spent 2 years at the church. But there came a moment where we realized, wow, we have kind of reached like a mountaintop for us. Because previous to that, we had been at churches that couldn't hire both of us. Both of us were studying to be in a ministry, and so they would hire her, and I would kind of just tag along. I would set out the chairs, and I would play foosball with the kids, and became really good at ping pong. The pastors would never really give me a chance to be on stage. I guess it was because I was wearing flip-flops at the time and jeans, and they didn't like that. But I never got a chance to really do ministry. But when we moved to Texas, they gave me a chance to do ministry at the same church. And we were like, yes, this is it. And then Brooklyn went from a salary of $24,000 to like $40,000. And so we thought we hit the lottery. And then they were paying me about $24,000 to work part-time. And we bought a house, and things were great. And we had extra spending money like we'd never had before. So we could go out and eat once in a while rather than just eat ramen noodles for most of the meals that we had. And we thought we were so awesome and so great. And then we became pregnant. Brooklyn did. I didn't. Brooklyn became pregnant. And we had been married for 8 years because we got married when we were 19 years old. And when you all get married someday that aren't married right now, if that's your plan in the future to get married, people start asking you the day you get married when you're going to have kids. The day, right, Bruno? I mean, the day you get married, when are you going to have kids? How many kids are you going to have? And if you have one, then they start asking the day you have the first one, how many more kids are you going to have? And so we'd heard that question a lot over those 8 years. And then toward the end of those 8 years, I not just heard it from other people. It was Brooklyn. Hey, when are we going to have a kid? And I was like, I could probably be without one for the rest of my life. Like, I like the way we're living right now. But, you know, that's not the way it can be. And so we ended up getting pregnant. And we thought, wow, this is like the moment for us. We've made our way into a career where we want to be. It was a great church. And we're about to have our baby. And so Brooklyn, she has our first child, March 11th, 2007. And she goes home, and she's on maternity leave that all moms do. And while she's at home, she notices something on Facebook. It's very interesting. Never heard of this before. She was kind of searching through Facebook, and she noticed somebody who was new to the church where we were working and new to the youth ministry where she was a part of it, like the one leading the ministry. And she did a little more research on this person's Facebook page, and as she was reading through the profile, she noticed that this person had the exact same title that she had at the church where we were working. Normally, you don't give the same title to two different people to do one job. And then her heart begins to melt, like, what is happening? This must be a mistake. And so that we set a meeting. I remember when we went in and we talked to the pastor, and she found out that she had been replaced while she was on maternity leave. And that feels like a valley. I don't know any of you who have had babies in this room, who have had children. I think after you have the baby, it's often that you go through a flood of emotions already anyway. You just carried this thing for 9 months, and now it's into the world, and your hormones have changed. Well, for Brooklyn, it was like times a million. Because not only she had her life just changed because a baby came into the world, but her life just changed because she just lost the job that she once had. I mean, they thought they were doing the right thing. They're like, Brooklyn, we'll move you into missions. And we're like, where did that come from? You're a white, rich church in a community where nobody needs help. What kind of missions are you going to be doing in your community? Like, you don't even have such a thing at your church right now. You're just trying to create a situation where it looks good on yourselves. And I remember Brooklyn saying to me just months after that I didn't realize while I was going to work and I was kind of processing it all in my own way, she was hiding in the closet crying for hours because she couldn't handle the situation of what was happening because she was in the valley. Have you ever been there in the valley? Like in the valley where you feel like, man, no matter what good is happening in my life, everything else feels bad. So here we were in the middle of a mountaintop, or what we thought was one of those moments where you want to be most present in as a couple, and then there's this valley that comes, this tragedy that happens, and it tries to steal everything that you have. And the reality is some of you are there right now. Some of you in your lives, you're experiencing some great things in certain areas and pockets, but there's one or two things that bring you down to the valley. Which is why we want to talk about this weekend, where in the world is God in those valleys? Is God really present with us? Is it the truth that in the Bible, when God announced that we will call this child Emmanuel, God with us, is this the reality of what we get to experience? So I want you to think about this. We may enjoy God on the mountaintop, but we get to know God intimately in the valley. I don't know if that's true for any of you in your lives, in your relationship that you have with your spouses or with your friends. You know, if you never go through a hard time, then your relationship kind of stays on the surface. You never get to the place where you get to break through some difficulties and get to know each other really well. I was talking to someone yesterday, and they were saying, I think friendships in our culture today, I think even like most family relationships in our culture today, we just don't want to give time to them. Like that's one of the biggest struggles that we have is we don't want to give time to them. And so the kind of relationships that we build are the relationships that make us feel good. So we'll become a friend with you to the point of where it feels good. And if it starts to feel bad, then our time is consumed with other things, and we won't give time to it. We just won't give time to it. And so because we won't give time to it, we never get to know you intimately. Because if we don't give the time to it, then we don't have the chance to know who you are, and then the relationship falls apart, and we're disconnected, and we move on to somebody else. But that's kind of what happens to us in relation to God. We love God when things are good, but when things get bad, we don't have time for God anymore, and we wonder, where is God? So if we go to the book of Psalms, chapter 84, we will find 3 verses that bring insight that can help us when we feel stuck in that valley. So if you have your Bibles, you can turn to the book of Psalms, chapter 84. We're going to read 3 verses. We're going to read verses 5 through 7. But for those of you who don't really understand and have a lot of insight into the Bible, the book of Psalms is found in the Old Testament. And it's one of those books that doesn't start at the beginning and have a natural flow of story throughout and then end with a high moment at the end. It's not a story that has a beginning, middle, and end. It's just a bunch of chapters of people who have written poems and songs, and each individual chapter has kind of its own message to us. So when you look at Psalm 84, it brings to us a message, but there's 3 key verses in this message that we want to focus on. In verse 5, it says, "Happy are those whose strength is in you, in whose heart are the highways to Zion. As they go through the valley of Baca, they make it a place of springs. The early rain also covers it with pools. They go from strength to strength. The God of gods will be seen in Zion." Now, you may be wondering, what in the world is the Valley of Baca? Like, if I can understand what that means, it might make sense to me what this person who has written this is trying to tell us. The Hebrew word that's used for the valley of Baca, is related to a tree. It's a kind of tree that is known for oozing sap. And so when people would walk by this tree, they would call it a weeper because it looked like it was crying, which is how the valley of Baca came to be called or referred to as the valley of tears, the valley of sorrows, or the valley of loss. This is the kind of place that you don't want to pass through because nothing good is going to happen there. When you pass through this kind of valley, like the valley of Baca, you're going to be coming through it with tears and hardship and a lot of anxiety. You're going to be anxious and worried and afraid. But if you look at the word valley throughout the Bible, what you find is the valley represents something that is extremely dangerous. It includes thorns. There's wild animals. There's vicious beasts. There are people who are waiting and hiding to ambush you and steal everything that you have. The valley, when you find it in the Bible, is the kind of place that if you pass through it, the chances of you passing through it without something bad happening to you is nearly impossible, which makes verse 5 something that we need to pay attention to because it tells us something that we need to understand. In verse 5 it says, "Happy are those whose strength is in you." In other words, happy are those whose strength is in God. Now, I imagine in a room like this, not everybody in this room is a committed follower of Jesus. Some of you are wondering, who is this Jesus, and why should I even think about believing in him? And that's not a judgment on you. That's me saying we're glad that you are here. But hear me out on this. If you're not a follower of Jesus, you are still like the rest of us. That you'll have moments in your life when you just have had enough. You really don't want to do it anymore. You're overwhelmed and you're exhausted. And you've come to the end of what you have. And if you don't have God, then what you have is all you have. But for those of us who are followers of Jesus, we believe that there's a strength that comes to us that goes beyond what we have. We believe that at the end of our strength comes God's strength. So let me help you maybe make sense of this by giving you an illustration. Like I'm in awe today of the different kinds of gyms that we go to. I don't know if you go to a gym or not, but there are so many different types of gyms, workout places where you can go and lose weight or gain muscle. And when I grew up, where I grew up, there was one gym, and it was owned by the local high school, and it was more like a garage. It literally just had one door that you rolled up, no heat, no air conditioning. You would sweat in the summer, you would freeze in the winter. And written on the wall in paint was, "No pain, no gain." We thought we were so tough. Didn't understand that saying until I started working out for the first time, and I understood that it is very painful. The first time you work out, I just recommend use low weight because you will be in pain for days. You will not be able to get in and out of your car if you do too much weight because your leg will be crippled for several days. And so that's all we would do, which is go into the weight room. It was the kind of place that football teams would go and hang out. It's the kind of place where basketball teams would try to go hang out. It was a place where volleyball teams and baseball teams, that's where all the teams went and hung out. And it was a dirty, it was a grungy, it was a loud place. And there was a phrase that we would often hear from our coaches, and we would repeat to one another, especially when we were doing one exercise that felt like the litmus test for you being a tough person. And that was the bench press. Every guy has the goal of having a high bench press. And for me, I started off with just the bar. I weighed like 125 pounds in the 9th grade, wet. I was just a skinny little kid who had to wear knee pads when I played basketball because it would bruise my knees when I fell. And so I started off with just the bar. And then when I got to be able to put 25 pounds on both sides of the bar, I thought, man, I'm getting there. And I couldn't wait to get one 45-pound weight on each side of the bar because my buddies were doing like 2 and 3 45-pound weights on the edges of the bar. And then one day I eventually got to the place where I think I can get 275 pounds on the bench press. I weighed like 140 pounds, people. That's pretty good. Like, you need to clap for me on that one. Like, that's a pretty big goal to get 275 pounds. And so I wanted this goal. I wanted to be somebody who could say, I did more than 250 pounds on the bench press. But you can't do that alone. You have to have someone who spots you. Have you seen this in the gym? Women, men, have you seen this in the gym? Those who maybe don't go to the gym as much, if you just pass through one time, you'll probably see it. If you've never done it, it is not the ideal situation to be laying on the bench, because what you get to see is this. You get to look up this way because they're standing over you like this, about to pull the bar off of you. And so as young boys, we like to play pranks on each other. As we were about to lift up the weight, we would like to surprise them with some friendly gas on each other's face. And so it was a scary place just because of that. And then we're laying on the bench about to press 275 pounds off. And the first time that I did it, it was a very intimidating situation. But I had someone spotting me, and I started to pull the weight. I let the weight drop down, and I started to push it back up. And I got about halfway, and that's where you begin to shake. And oftentimes when you're young, you have one arm stronger than the other. I have no idea why. It's normally not your strong hand that's stronger. It's normally your weak hand that's stronger for some reason. And the bar looks like this, and you're trying to push it up a little bit like this. And eventually, the person who's spotting you, they will decide whether or not they need to put their hands underneath the bar and help it get the rest of the way up. But what you hear them saying is, come on. That's what they yell. Come on, it's all you. That means they want you to do it on your own. Come on, it's all you. You got this. It's all you. And then they put their fingers and their hands on the bar and lift it up. And they're like, you did it. And I'm like, no, I didn't. I didn't do it. It wasn't all me. It was you. It was you. You put your hands on the bar and you lifted it up. At the end of my strength, it was all you. You know, the good news for us who are followers of Jesus, or if you want to be a follower of Jesus, is that at the end of your strength, you have the access to God's strength. You have strength that comes at the end of your own. That when you've reached the end of what you can do physically, mentally, emotionally, wherever you are, that God steps in and gives you what you can't have on your own. That's good news. That's God with us. That's something that allows us to become and to be and to experience something that's way beyond what we can experience on our own. And what we want you to know is if you're in the middle of a valley right now, you have access, or you can have access to the very real, ever-present power of a good God who is ready and able to come and assist you. It says, happy are those whose strength is in God. It doesn't say happy are those who figure it out on their own. It doesn't say happy are those who make it out of their own way. It doesn't say happy are those who pull up their own bootstraps. It doesn't say happy are those who are really determined. A sense of independence is something that we really struggle with as human beings, even those of us who are followers of Jesus, because we are not created to be independent. We are created by God to depend on God, and that's a truth that some of you really need to lean into in your life. You need to admit that where you are right now, you cannot handle the situation on your own. You need God. Anybody there? I know some of you are there. If you go back to verse 5, you see the second part of it. It says this, it says, happy are those in whose hearts are the highways to Zion. A different translation says, happy are those who've set their minds on a pilgrimage to Jerusalem. Well, the city of Zion and the city of Jerusalem are interchangeable names for the same place. And the people who would have heard these words for the very first time would know that this city of Zion, or this city of Jerusalem, is also the city of refuge. It's the place of peace. And they have determined in their hearts to get there. They've determined in their minds that's the journey that we are taking. So we could think of it like this. Happy are those who set their minds toward God. Happy are those who set their minds toward God. Because what you think about matters. Where you are in life is one thing, but what you think about is something else. And the Bible tells us to set your minds on what? Things above, not on things below. I think there's a phrase that we struggle with as human beings. And the phrase is, I can't do it. That's a phrase that I tried to remove from my family's mental catalog. And when my kids say, I can't do it, you know what I tell them? You're right. If you say you can't, then you probably won't. And Brooklyn and I have been helping out with a volleyball team at Southwest Middle School. And it's been a lot of fun, but these girls have never played volleyball before in their entire life, which for somebody who's as competitive as me is not the best situation to put me in. Like, I want these girls to know how to play volleyball. And if you tell them to do something, they kind of just look at you like, okay. And then they go and they do something else. Like, they don't really know how to serve that well. And so we just put them out there and we teach them how to serve. They have no idea how to pass. All they do is just hit the ball back over the net. And half the time they can barely do that. But they're learning and they're getting better. And every time one of those volleyball players says, I can't do it, I tell them the same thing I tell my own kids. You know what? You're right. If you believe you can't, then you probably won't. You probably won't. And so there was a moment with my daughter, Kira, where I translated my experience as a young basketball player to her as a young volleyball player. When I was a boy, I learned that you should shoot 1,000 shots a day if you want to become a great basketball player. And so I did it every single day in my backyard or at the local school. I would shoot 1,000 basketball shots a day. I don't know if you realize how many that is. That's a lot of basketball shots. Like, that's a lot. Like, that's 1, 2, sometimes 3 hours. But when I would do that, I made up in my own mind that I will not stop and go home until I make 10 foul shots in a row. 10 in a row. I've made over 100 foul shots in a row before. But when it came to that moment where I put pressure on myself to make 10 in a row, I would get to 9 so many times, and I would miss that 10th one, and I would take the ball, and I'd be so angry I wanted to punch the ball in the face, even though it didn't have one. So I'd just take it, and I would punt it over the trees, and these were tall trees in my neighbor's yard, and I'd have to go chase the ball down. I would sometimes take the fence, kind of shake it like I could rip it off the wall or the fence wire or whatever you want to call it, and I would look in my garage, and I had glass on the door, and I would look at myself, and I'm like, you are pitiful. What are you doing? Like, talk to myself. Like, it was hard moments for me, but I would not go inside. I would not quit until I made 10 foul shots in a row. And so I was with my daughter recently, and I said, Kira, I got some plan for you. We're not going home until you hit the ball over the net 10 times in a row. She's like, is that what you used to do, Daddy? I said, that's exactly what I would do. She's like, all right, I'm going to try that. So here would be Kira hitting the ball over the net. She'd be doing great, and she'd get to 9, and what do you think happens? It's like she forgets. It's like her arm turns into a noodle. It's like the net is raised 10 more feet above where it was. It's like the out-of-bounds lines became like squeezed in by 10 feet on both sides. She could not figure it out, and she became more frustrated and more frustrated. And she's like, Daddy, this is different because we're playing somewhere that's not home. And if you couldn't do it, you could just walk inside your house, but I have to walk all the way home from where I am if you leave me here to do this on my own. She's like, I can't do it, Daddy. I can't do it. I said, yes, you can. Because I'm going to stay here with you until you do. And she did it. You know, sometimes we get to the place where we believe that we can't do it. Your current situation, you know, you may be in the valley, but listen, your mind can be set towards something else. It can be set toward God, helping you believe and trusting that God is with me, that God is for me, that greater is the one in me than the one who is in the world. We can believe that God's word is a lamp to my feet and a light to my path. We can determine in our hearts that we're on a journey, and the place that we're going to is the city of refuge, the place of peace. Because it says in verse 6 that as they go through the valley, it says they're going through the valley. They're not stopping and camping out. They're not making this their new home. They're not claiming this and laying foundations in this valley that they're in. It says that they are passing through it. And we may be in a valley right now as individuals and even as a church, but God says to us, you are only merely passing through if you're with me. So we may be facing a difficult time, but we know God will get us through. I may be hurting right now, but I know God tells me I will not be hurting forever. I may be in a dark place, but God says, I'm leading you toward the light. As they go through the valley, it says, they make it a place of springs. And you're all like, what does that mean? They're passing through the desert where there is no water, where there's no source of, well, now I'm tired and I need to grab a drink. And so what they do in this dry land is they begin to dig holes, and they begin to make wells, anticipating the provision that they think God will bring to them. They're making room for the presence of God. It's almost like they hear God saying to them, show me your faith, and I'll show you my faithfulness. Or it's like they hear God saying, if you dig it, then I will fill it. Or it's like they're hearing God say, hey, if you invite me to come, then I will show up. It's sort of like the person in the Gospels who with Jesus, who wants to have himself healed. He has this hand that's been crippled for a long time, and Jesus looks at him and says, stretch out your hand, and I will heal it. You know, I'm not sure who this message is for, but I'm convinced that somebody needs to hear this. I'm convinced that somebody right now in this room is in a dry place, and what you need to hear is that you can make a well. You can dig a hole. You can prepare for the presence and provision of God, because God promises, if you draw near to me, I will draw near to you. If you make room for me, God says, I will come to you. We know that some of us haven't sensed the presence of God in weeks, in months, in years, and some of us never have. And so it's time for you, you know it, to dig a ditch, to make a well, to say to God, I'm going to stop and I'm going to wait for you, because some of you really, really need an encounter with God. But do you know that God's presence is rarely made known to anybody who is rushed? What we want when we're in these situations is we want out. We want out of the situation. We want God to reach down and pluck us from where we are and completely remove us to somewhere else. But that's not how God leads us. God says, I am with you, so that when you pass through the valleys that you have to pass through to get to the places that I'm calling you, I go with you. You can't rush through it. You have to wait for me to take you through it, and so we can go through it together. I mean, imagine Moses going at 75 miles per hour past the burning bush. Moses would have never stopped, and the people would have never been rescued. So some of you, it's time to prepare and to say to God, I want to meet with you. I'm going to wait for you. I'm going to believe that you will reveal yourself to me. As the band comes up, here's what we hope you'll understand out of this message this weekend, is that God never, ever promised that you would never go through the valley. God promises that you will not go through the valley alone, because God is with us. That's what the gospel tells us in the book of Matthew chapter 1, when it says, and the virgin will be with child, and they will call him Emmanuel, which means God is with us. I love how the book of Psalms chapter 84 closes up this thought in verse 7 when it says that they go from strength to strength. In other words, each step of the way they move and they grow from a little bit of strength to a little bit more strength and more strength and even more strength, until they eventually grow to the point where they have the strength of God behind them. And that's what happens in your life when you're somebody who calls upon God, until you eventually reach the place called Zion, that place of refuge, that place of peace, where you can stand on the mountaintop again, ready to go into the next valley, believing that God will go with you. So it doesn't matter what you have to pass through, because you know you can make it with the one who created you. It's happened in my life personally from the day that I can remember following Jesus at 4 years old. My life has not been perfect, even though that's the nickname that my siblings like to give me. I remember my mom and dad having a hard time and never knew why. And then find out when I'm 30 years old. And then it all comes back to me and begins to make sense. And I realize that through those hard times, God was with me. God's been that way in my personal life, in my family life, when Brooklyn and I have gone through hard times with her losing her job and not even knowing it, from us moving from one location to another, 14 hours away from where we were before. And it's happened in the life of this church. I want you to think about this. This church was born in the valley. honestly. This church was born out of the news that came to me that my job no longer existed where I was. And I thought, what do I do now? And some of you are like, let's pass through this moment together. Let's pass through it together. Let's stay together. Let's see where God is taking us. Brooklyn was traveling, and she was working at a job that she really, really loved. She got to go to places all over the world and set up projects for clean water and make sure that people had sanitation and connect with people who speak languages that none of you would even imagine being in the presence of, and seeing elephants run around and seeing kids being malnourished and seeing families celebrating the power of God in places that you think God may not exist. And so she was traveling during this time when I received this news, and so I'm communicating with her, Brooke, I don't know what I'm going to do. And then some of you were like, let's start a church, and I told her, and she's like, Coy, I don't know if that's time for us. But we kind of worked through it over the phone. And when she came home, there was a church that I thought, this might be the location where we start. I just felt like God saying, this is the location where you're going to start, if you're going to do it. It's a little church up off of South Florida, across from Five Guys. They sell Christmas trees. We get them there every year now since that moment. And I took her to the parking lot, and I sat in my Jeep. And she's like, Coy, are you sure this is what we're going to do? And I was like, no, but I just believe this is the place that we're going to do it if we do. And I just started like weeping, which if you know me, I've been described as a robot. Like emotions don't really compute with me. But in that moment, they computed because I knew I was in the valley, and there was no way I could pass through it on my own. And I just cried, and Brooklyn looked at me, and she said, okay, let's try it. That's not the place where we ended up, as you can tell. But God was with us. And here we are 2.5 years later at Somos Church. I think there's some of you who may have pockets in your life right now that are going really, really good. But there's this one pocket where the valley is extremely difficult. And it's there where you desperately need the presence of God. You desperately need the presence of God. And so I want you to stand with me. I'm going to ask you to do something that may be uncomfortable. And it's okay if you don't, because I'm the kind of person who doesn't like somebody telling me what to do, especially somebody from stage. Like if you tell me to raise my hand, I'm not going to raise my hand, but I'm going to ask you to raise your hand. And you don't have to do it. I won't judge you. But will you raise your hands with me? Raise your left or right hand. It doesn't matter which one, because there's some of you in the room right now who are in the valley. You're in the valley. And you're not sure that God is with you. And you're at the end of your strength. And you know if you rely on your own strength that you won't make it through. And so some of you who are raising your hand right now, you're raising your hand and you're saying, that's me. Like, that's me. I'm there right now. My marriage is about to fall apart. I'm about to lose my job. I don't want to live anymore. I'm not sure why I exist in this world. Why do these things keep happening to me? All these different things that could be going on in your life. And it takes all the good, and it makes all of it feel bad. And so as you're raising your hand, I want you to say to God, I need you. I want you. I'm going to believe that you're going to show up in my life. You can let your hands down as we pray. God, be with us. You say that you're with us. Then make your presence known. Some of us here in this room, we're struggling. We have some good stuff happening. We have some healthy relationships. We have a good connection to this church. We have friends that we love. We have opportunities that we're grateful for. But then we have one or two things that really drag us down into the valley. Those things, they take us and they depress us, and they make us worried, and they make us afraid, and they make us hurt, and they make us believe that I can't do it, and there's no way through this place, and if I could just be plucked from where I am and placed somewhere else. But you say to us that we will pass through some valleys, but you promise us that you will give us your presence and your provision to help get us through. And so, God, that's what we ask for this morning. We ask for you to come and meet with us. We ask for your presence. And so what we'll do is we'll start digging those holes. We'll start making those wells, believing if we reach out our hand and ask for it to be healed, that you will come and be with us, and you will turn the direction of where we're headed to a place that is good. So God, go with us. be with us and let us know that you are here. In your name we pray. Amen.